Ahoy everyone, Tightrope here, and today we're taking a look at the balance changes to Wehrmacht, Brits and Afrika Korps made in the 1.80 patch. Onto Wehrmacht, and we're starting out with Pioneers. They got 10 more health per model, which I think is justified because they were dying super fast in the previous patch, but they also got a DPS increase up close, cooldown bonus, leading to about 12% more DPS in close quarters. In the patch preview, the developer said this was done to improve the matchup of Pioneers against Scouts in the early game, so I did some pre-patch testing. Pioneers charging into Scouts that are out in the open. The Pioneers won 5 out of the 6 engagements by a very narrow margin. I also repeated this test but put the Scouts behind heavy cover, but that didn't seem to change much. If we take a look at the Pioneers' DPS curve, I think I can see a reason for this. When they're further than about 15 range away, they're doing very, very little damage, right? So that basically doesn't matter too much at all with heavy cover bonus. Half of not very much is still not very much. But then, as you're closing the gap between 15 and 7 range, they get a sharp increase in damage. So that is where you will be benefiting from heavy cover if you're a Scout against the Pioneers. But then once you're at 7 range, cover is then nullified by the point blank mechanic. So they're going to be doing max damage at this range anyway. So it's really only this range from 15 to 7 where the Scouts benefit from cover that much. And that only takes Pioneers about 2 seconds to cross that distance. So it's like a very short window of time where the cover actually has time to work properly. Redoing this engagement, but now in the current patch, I didn't notice much of a difference. I think the reason behind this is that Scouts do 12 damage per bullet, so they used to need 8 shots to kill a Pio model pre-patch from full, and then 8 shots as well in this patch. So it hasn't changed the shots to kill when everything's at full health. So in this lag round test, we're not going to see much of a difference, but out in the real world, where maybe units are coming into engagements on lower health, the extra health for the Pios will matter more. Grenadiers have had their build time reduced by 4 seconds, going to 20, kind of bringing them into line with a lot of the other main lines who are also around 20. I will say that Wehrmacht's known for slow starts in 1v1s, a lot of players opting to build a second Pioneer as an option to counteract that, but now with the slightly earlier Grenadiers, maybe that won't be as necessary. Wehrmacht Panzergrenadiers have had their DPS buffed right across the attack range. New values in blue, old values in red. Got about 13% more DPS up close, trailing off to, a tiny bit extra at afar. Comparing these to Riflemen, you'll match up against double bar rifles. Rifles still have the edge up close, but not by that much. Peregrines overtake them a little bit over here, very close. And then from about 25 range onwards, Riflemen stretch a reasonable gap there as well. The 251 has had a couple changes. First off, it's had a fuel cost increase by 10, going up to 30, which is the same as the US Forces M3, so I think that's fair enough. On top of that, the Stummel upgrade on it now costs 10 more munitions and takes 15 seconds longer to complete, so they're just trying to delay the onset of the Stummel, which has been pretty popular recently, because it's been pretty good. On top of that, they've fixed a bug. It used to be the case that when you upgraded the Stummel, then you went for the Officers' Corps training, you wouldn't get the Vet 1 on the Stummel, and that has been fixed now, so that's a nice bug fix. The 221 has had a fuel cost increase by 5, one of the lower amounts for a light vehicle, but I think that's fair enough because it wasn't particularly potent in its previous timing, because the Luftwaffe Company takes 10 extra fuel to build compared to Panzergrenadier Company, so that just delayed the 221 in the first place. And on top of that, because it's reasonably lightly armoured, and you do tend to drive point blank on enemy squads with it to try and maximise damage, it is probably going to take more damage in return from the 1.5 penetration on rifles. The Flak 30 has had an improvement to its performance against aircraft, so we're going to test that out here. I've put it into anti-air mode, which I don't think gives it any buffs, like some of the other weapons gives them like rotation bonuses and stuff. But the Flak can only fire like in that kind of cone straight ahead, so sometimes it doesn't shoot at planes because of that limitation, but we'll see how it goes here. I'm going to set up a Brit loiter on the other end of the range. It's aimed at them. See how it goes. I feel like I nearly got it with that last one. Yeah, I mean, that's respectable. If it's facing the right direction at the right time, it's going to shoot down planes in a decent timing. The Wirbelwind got a fuel cost increase by 10, which is probably fair enough. It does kind of arrive on like the tail end of the light vehicle time, so maybe they want to slow this down as well. Personally, I hadn't been seeing much of the Wirbelwind in the previous patch, but maybe with the nerfs to US Forces motor pool, we'll start seeing Wirbels in that matchup a lot more. The Marder got a fuel cost increase by only 5, so it got off relatively lightly in this patch, though I do think I remember it getting nerfed in terms of fuel cost a couple patches ago, so that may have had something to do with it. But in terms of population now, at only 7, it's looking like a real bargain compared to the Chaffee. The Stug got a fuel cost increase by 10, similar to the Wirbel, probably fair enough. But besides this, it also got buffed. It got 40 more armor on the front and sides. 250 frontal armor now. That's actually really hard to get through. It's a big buff, and its rotation rate is faster. It went from 28 to 32. Sometimes I think like rotation rate and pivot rate can be different, right? Not sure if this is going to work, but I'm going to try flanking with the Chaffee, see if I can outmaneuver a Stug over here. Given a Vet 1 as well, just so I can pop a speed boost if necessary. See if I can get around to the side of it. Doesn't look like it. Speed boost. Yeah, you need the speed boost. I wonder if... Yeah, as soon as you lose that speed boost, the Stug even catches up with you now. So outmaneuvering a Stug with a Chaffee could be a bit of a grind, at least if you want to try circle it around like this. Your best bet is probably to stay like right on top of it close. Try drive back and forth, try force it to rotate back and forth awkwardly. You guys may have missed my FPVs, but I've been having quite a lot of success with the Stug G lately, especially if you can combine it up with a battle group. It means you don't have to tick up to the final stage of tech, at least until quite a lot later on. Maybe you can go for the Obiche as your late game, or maybe like a Panther, Corlin. And delay your final stage of tech. You can really hit like a pretty strong timing around the time the Stug arrives. And you got the Nebel for the indirect fire as well. Point blank blast, you know, get the Vet 1 training on this. It's actually quite potent. So now it's going to be bouncing like way more AT gun shots off the front, and it's harder to flank. I think the Stug's going to be really good this patch. The Brummbar has had its fuel cost increased by 10, which is probably fair enough. This has been seeing a tremendous amount of play as of late. They also say they fixed a bug with Shatter Will. Used to be the case where you could keep chasing the squad and keep slowing them with Shatter Will. Made it extremely easy to get squad wipes. And try that out here. Shatter their will. You can see they're shattered. It retreats. No longer slowed on retreat. And on top of that, I imagine I can't keep shattering them. So I'm going to run alongside of them, trying to shatter them. I don't think I'm slowing them down at all with the shatter, which you could do in the previous patch. Made it really easy to get squad wipes. The Tiger has had the AoE on its main gun reworked. Basically, they've made the radius larger, but they've made it do less damage in the middle, more damage close to the edge. So it should one-shot squads less often, but should do more consistent damage when it lands near an enemy squad. So we'll see how it goes here, up against a couple of squads of riflemen, one clumped, one out in the open. Oh my goodness. Did like over half health with that one shot. Alright. Seems to be pretty consistently landing on the model every time as well here. In the Breakthrough Battle Group, the Blitzkrieg ability has been nerfed, similar to the other global speed boosters in this patch, going down from 35 to 20% speed boost. This one though didn't get nerfed to the rate of fire bonus, so that still makes it quite appealing, and it also doesn't say how long it lasts for here in the white text. lasts for 30 seconds, but it would be nice if it said that in the description. The 8 Rad might have got the most nerfs out of any unit in this patch. First off, if you want to unlock it through the Mechanized Battle Group, its command point cost has gone up by 1, so it's going to be arriving quite a lot later. The same timing as the Stug D, which also got buffed this patch. We'll have a look at that later on. But that makes this look a lot more appealing now. On top of that, its cost has gone up by 15 fuel and 1 population. And it's had an accuracy nerf at mid and long range. Tremendous number of nerfs for the 8 Rad this patch. I did a TTK test before and after the patch, 8 Rad versus Rifleman around 25 range away. Post patch, it took a bit over 3 seconds longer to kill the Rifle Squad. Note that the 8 Rad's mid range is at 20 range, so the Riflemen were positioned closer to mid range than they were to long, where the 8 Rad had more of an accuracy nerf. 8 Rad spam from Mechanized was definitely far too strong in the previous patch, but I do feel they've gone overboard with the nerfs here, and I really feel sorry for the Africa Corps players because they're getting hit by the same dose of nerfs in terms of cost increases and accuracy decrease as the Wehrmacht one, where I barely saw Africa Corps players using the 8 Rad in the previous patch already. And I think what made it so potent from Mechanized is raid package, right? You get smoke, which was a very costly side upgrade for Africa Corps, and vehicle capture, again, very costly for Africa Corps, comes online way later if you want to get it as well. You have to go for like extra side tech and then get it from your armory. That's kind of what made it so potent. On top of that as well, like, because it's a call-in vehicle, usually you'd have to maybe go for like an extra side tech to kind of unlock a vehicle of this strength, but because it's a call-in, you could kind of skip that, so it meant that maybe you could like spit out 2 of these relatively quickly, which would be hard to keep up with. So there was a lot of extra factors that made this strong, and because it had, you know, that capping, if it took damage, you could like back it off to like a back sector, do some back capping while you waited for your pyros to be able to come in and heal it. And on top of this, they did nerf Mechanized Assault. We're going to have a look at this later on, but that was part of what made spamming 8 Rad so popular as well, and that's getting nerfed now. So yeah, I think they went overboard with the 8 Rad nerfs, and I feel sorry for Africa Corps players because I think this unit is kind of in the toilet now, and certainly I don't think players are going to be using this anymore in the Mechanized Battle Group either. Elsewhere in the Battle Group, mobile repair stations has come down in command point cost by 1. I think they're trying to buff this up a bit to compensate for some of the other nerfs the Battle Group has taken in this patch. And the Mechanized Assault ability, the repair over time that it does has been reduced from 10 health per second down to 3.5. So it's a huge nerf to its repairs. I will say that, yeah, I did think this ability was really stupid because quite often, you know, people would pop it and then they just drive forwards. Maybe you'll be able to get 2 shots off on their vehicle as they're driving into your AT guns, but then they're behind your AT gun. They'll repair off that damage from Mechanized Assault and made it really hard for your supporting AT to try and polish off what they're pushing with. So yeah, I really did hate the in-combat repairs aspect of this ability, and they have given it a massive nerf in this patch, and it may need a slight buff now, maybe in terms of cost or some other abilities after that change, because otherwise I don't think it's going to see that much action. The Stug D got the same buffs as the Stug G, 40 extra frontal and side armor, and faster rotation rate. I'm a bit more sympathetic to the faster rotation rate on the D variant because, you know, it does have relatively short range, made it somewhat easy for squads to like flank around, and since it can't defend itself very well against vehicles in the first place, it being able to rotate quickly is less of an issue, right? Because it can't really shoot back at fast flanking vehicles, so that seems like less of an issue here than it was on the G variant. But yeah, at this timing, with this much armor, I think this is going to be a real handful to deal with. It's kind of like a mini Brummbar, and especially from Mechanized. You know, this is like an okay timing. You're not going to have to spend that much on tech to get it, so that means maybe you could even spit out 2 of these. It's pretty costly with the Stossstrupen on top of it as well, but maybe there could be some kind of strategy with double Stugs. And yeah, that could be pretty strong because like bazookas and stuff are going to have a really hard time dealing with this with the extra armor. So let's give that a test. We've got the Stug D here upgraded with the machine gun because you're always going to do that. Up against foot guards at, you know, mid-ish range. Pretty standard engagement range for these kind of units to be fighting against each other. See how they go. These guys at the front here are having an absolute mare. Ones out the back are doing better. Probably going to do worse as the engagement wears on. Because you can imagine maybe at the start of the engagement, if the bazookas are on like the edge of the fight, maybe they can get some side armor hits, but as they drop down to like 3 models, Stug starts to face them, and all the shots are going to be going on the front for sure. But yeah, you know, depending on exactly where the positioning is on the frontal armor, Stug doing pretty well in that engagement. In the Luftwaffe battle group, the LG-40 Vet 1 ability has been buffed. It was definitely like a dumpster tier ability in the previous patch, but they've reworked its AoE, so now the AoE radius is larger, does less damage right in the middle, but more damage out towards the edges, and has massively reduced scatter as well, so it should land on squads more reliably as well. So we're going to see how it goes here. Got a squad clumped up.
Ready for deployment,
And a
sir.
squad out in the open. And we'll see how it does. We're like not at absolute max range, but you know, pretty standard kind of range on the outer edge of like auto attack range for a squad. Oops. Saw prioritized vehicles. Gonna have to remember to turn that off. Ooh, that was a big hit. Focus on this guy first. Ooh, I don't think this has got a damage cap on it, right? That's interesting. Maybe it needs one. Probably not. His AoE's not that big. Oh, maybe just for consistency's sake, right? Maybe we should have one. Most other things like this would have like 3 or 4 damage cap. Alright. Definitely much improved. Especially if the squad is clumped up on the wrong side of cover. So the shots can't scatter along of the squad. Doing pretty well. But even against the squad out in the open, you know, it's landing reasonably reliably. So I have heard that in team games, kind of spamming these is actually kind of good now, because you can get like the veterancy training, so you can get straight Vet 1 on them. And then if you get like 5 of them, you can actually like blast infantry pretty good, which, you know, typical team game stuff. Spamming blobs of stuff. And because the like round switching is like pretty fast, right? You know, there's like a decent cooldown on the ability, but switching from one to the other, you know, you're up and firing. Like during that cooldown you can fire, it's just you can't toggle back and forth that quickly. But it doesn't stop you from firing during that cooldown at all. So yeah, that's something to watch out for. Kind of a little bit anti-everything. Maybe they need to stop it from firing during those cooldowns, make churn between switching rounds a little bit more painful, something like that. A couple other changes to the Luftwaffe battle group. Now you can build the relay point straight away instead of the Flak 38 emplacement. It's also had a cost reduction of 25 manpower, and they say they've increased the reinforcement radius from 50 to 60, but you can see the circle indicator is still only to 50. I'm going to run forwards. See at what point I start getting reinforced here. Here we go. Got a reinforcement just then. And there it is. So it kind of seems like maybe 55-ish range. Doesn't really seem like 60. I'm not sure how that's being measured, but either way the circle is a bit of a liar. So now the Flak 38 is in the position the Luftwaffe relay point used to be, so you're going to have to unlock that if you want it. But they've also buffed it. They've given its range back. They nerfed it, I think, in the previous patch to make it the same as the Bofors, but now it's back. Up to about 50 range, similar to the team weapon, Flak. And they've also reworked its variancy. I don't know if that's a nerf or a buff yet. But what I wanted to see was it got extra damage if at 3. So how quickly is it going to be able to get through a squad and a Stuart? A Vet 3 one. Let's see how we go. With the extra damage. Don't really notice it too much on a spread out squad like this maybe. But it's churned through the Stuart at a decent rate. Not the X factor like, oh man, I really have to get it and try and like vet up to Vet 3. Like, oh, that's just like crazy OP or anything like that. But alright. Maybe it'll help it in AA mode if you want to use it in AA mode. Might shoot down planes faster with that extra damage. In the Italian coastal battle group, the designated artillery Overwatch, they've added a 3.5 second delay before the shells start to land when you first activate it. See how that feels. And that's quite a long delay before they start to come down. So you're going to have to do this like preemptively. Not when you're already in trouble, because yeah, that is quite a long delay, both before the smoke appears and then when the shell's taking to land as well. If your bunker's already in low health, your enemy might be able to polish it off before anything even comes out of this. They made a change to rapid fortifications. Now, when you build a bunker through this, the upgrades on it are also discounted by 50%. So not only is the bunker cheaper to build in the first place, but the upgrades are cheaper as well. So here's a bunker I built with Pioneers. Those upgrades, we've got 60, 70, 70, 60. Going down to 30, 35, 35, 30. That's a pretty big munitions discount. Especially, I think this is combined up with Coastal Wall as well. 19 munitions only. Super, super cheap. So it makes it more appealing to use rapid fortifications. Call the Reserves has had its munitions cost decreased by 10. I think the ability itself is actually pretty decent. It's just it's up against such a monstrous ability here in Bulwark, which is just so strong. That's why we don't see this used too often. The Artillery Officer's Artillery Observer Overwatch ability has been nerfed heavily this patch. First off, if the officer gets suppressed while it's active, the ability will cancel rather than just like a range reduction. So machine guns will be better against them. It's also had a slight range reduction from 37.5 down to 35. The size of the circle has been shrunk both at Vet 0 and at Vet 3, is it, when it gets the buff? So it's quite a lot smaller in terms of that. Barrages now require line of sight, didn't know about that. And the delay before the first shells start to fall increased by 2.5 seconds. So let's see how that feels with the extra delay.
Laying zone for bombardment. Requesting all guns. Fire for effect.
I mean, that is pretty easy to dodge. That's a long time. Like, sometimes it can be hard to like notice as the enemy to notice the circle on the ground that you have to dodge, but that is a really long delay. It's going to be easy to get out of the circle before that comes in. I feel like after this nerf, the artillery officer's probably not going to see that much play anymore. Sappers, also known as Royal Engineers, got their damage drop-off pushed out. Their DPS used to start dropping off at 7 range, now it's been pushed out to 10. And at first glance it doesn't look like that big of a deal, but if you look at 10 range, 40 damage, versus 10 range before this, almost half that at 22. That does make it seem a bit more important. On top of this, they got their build time reduced, and remember, there was a flamethrower buff this patch as well, so flamer sappers going to be quite a lot more appealing. Now let's see how things go. Sappers closing the distance on Grenadiers behind heavy cover. I think this is a pretty important matchup because this one happens quite often in the early game. So the winner of this fight, they're kind of similarly costed. Happens a lot in the early game, this matchup. So it needs to be relatively competitive, and this is like best case scenario for Grenadiers, right? You can cover at the start of the fight. And it looks like the sappers
Royal engineers
have
out of
an
contact.
edge.
Presumed dead.
Not a massive one, it's pretty close, but yeah, I mean, that's a little bit worrying. The Dingo has had its moving performance altered. They've reduced the burst length, so how long it will be firing its machine gun will be shorter now if it's firing while on the move. So it'll be doing less damage in that regard, but they've increased the accuracy of it while it's firing on the move. So will essentially reduce the firing on the move penalty by a little bit they used to have. So I think the net impact here is they wanted it to be similar against infantry while firing on the move, but worse against vehicles, because vehicles are so big, the extra accuracy doesn't really matter too much. You're going to hit them 100% of the time anyway with a Dingo. So let's see how this goes. Oops. Looks like it still very comfortably wins against a 250 that's also firing on move that has no squads inside of it. The Humber got a fuel cost increase, but only by 5. It was only a couple of patches ago that I think it got reduced to 30 in the first place, and it was still seeing play before then, so I expect still going to see plenty of play now. 5 fuel. I feel like it got off pretty easy compared to a lot of the other vehicles in this patch. But it also got an accuracy bonus. When it shoots against snipers specifically, has 100% more accuracy. Because, Brits don't have their own sniper to counter-snipe with. So I guess they want their Humber to be kind of used in that role. So let's see how it goes against a sniper here. Relatively long range. And that is a very, very quick kill. I know this is like out in the open, no cover, but that was fast. The CMP truck has had its fuel cost increased by 5. That seems fine. And the Stuart has had its fuel cost increased by 10. On the face of that, that seems fine, but that means it is 70 fuel to get your first Stuart out here, which is a bit of a slog. Don't know how much Stuart play we'll be seeing after this patch. The Matilda has had its near AoE value nerfed. So now if a scattershot lands directly on top of a soldier, it will only do 75 damage instead of 100. So I do think Matilda was maybe like marginally overperforming in terms of anti-infantry before this, so did have a bit of room to get nerfed and still be relevant, I think. There we go. Yeah, so there we go. We've got 3 models there with about 75 damage. Yeah, well, let's just try it out against the squad out in the open as well. See how it goes. Yeah, so that's the instance right there. Previously, that would have been a kill shot on this model here. And that kind of just means it'll be like one more shot now the Matilda needs to take to kill that model. Makes it easier for squads to get away. So yeah, I think it's kind of hard for me to make a judgment on this based on what we're seeing here. I think it'll probably take me like a couple of weeks of playing with it and against it to get a proper feel whether this was too much of a nerf or not for the Matilda. The Grant has had its population cost increased from 12 up to 13. When you compare it to the P4, which also has a population cost of 13, I think this makes a lot of sense, because I'd say the Grant's probably better than the P4 at the moment, so it should cost at least that amount. The Bofors got a buff to its anti-air damage, so I wanted to test it out a bit. So I've got a Bofors out on this side of Rotatuners, guarding the fuel and the VP that's usually over here. Maybe a position where you might consider putting it. And we're going to see how it does. Got a tank in the middle of the map. I made it the Churchill just because it's big. See how long it takes to shoot down the Axis AT Loiter. Africa Corps usually has how many passes? It's 1 pass. Put it on AA mode just in case it does anything. I'm not sure if it does. 2 passes. So it's 2.5, I think. One of them got shot down over there. Let's say there's a total of 3. So a total of 3 passes that comes through before that Loiter gets shot down for for 600 damage, almost 700 damage. Pretty much enough to kill like most medium tanks. The BL 5.5 got a command point cost reduction by 1, combined with all the other buffs it's got recently with the extra shells. I think it got a scatter buff, and then the AoE damage buff this patch makes the BL 5.5 a really appealing option. Like rushing it straight away, maybe, certainly isn't that good in ones because you can't defend it that effectively, but could be a pretty solid option in like the big team modes where there's so much more blobbing. Just targeting like somebody's forward mid truck or something with like a super early BL 5.5 could be pretty potent, or just using it with the saturation shells, just constantly firing on like the mid VP or something would be really hard for the Axis to push in after that. So yeah, it still comes online later if you're trying to rush it out compared to like the M2A1, but way earlier than the Obiche if you're trying to rush that. The Thompsons on the SMG upgraded Ghurkas have been buffed, an extra half a damage per bullet. The old DPS curve in red and new one in blue. So yeah, an extra bit of damage there. That's fine for them. I do think, quite a few of the SMG based elites were kind of struggling after the TTK changes just because they take more damage on approach. So maybe by the time they got in there, they'd lose one extra model. Then they wouldn't be able to win fights that they could previously. So I do think they were kind of due a buff. So this is fine. On a similar note, the SMG Commandos also got a buff to their submachine gun, accuracy up close, and then cooldown mid-range. So this is what the DPS change should look like. Blue is the new version, red on the old. So more noticeable than the Ghurka buff. However, I'm not sure this is correct because when I came to COH3 stats and just put in the default weapons, this is what it looked like. And you can see here, by default, COH3 stats was using Sten Commando UK instead of Sten Commando Africa UK. So I was thinking, that's a little bit weird. Maybe COH3 stats is wrong. But then I had a look in the mod tools, and if we come to Commando Africa UK, I think this is the multiplayer version. I'm not 100% sure on this. But anyway, if we come down to it and we see what weapon it's using Sten Commando UK, which is this one here, which is the same, if we click on either one, the single player version, they're both using Sten Commando UK instead of Sten Commando Africa UK. So I think they've got the wrong weapon on the multiplayer version at the moment. So you won't see any of these DPS buffs. I think. I'm not 100% on this, but I think so. The Churchill Black Prince received a similar AoE rework to the Tiger, where its AoE was enlarged. It's doing less damage right in the middle, but more damage out towards the edges. So more consistent, less likely to one-shot stuff. It's probably fair enough. On top of that, it also got a penetration bonus now. So yeah, it's going to do even better in the head-to-head matchup against the Tiger, and it'll be almost guaranteed to penetrate the Brummbar at every range. So this thing's going to be even better. Like most of the times when I manage to get a Black Prince out in once, like that's just about GG. This thing is so hard to stop. On to Africa Corps, and we're starting out with the teching costs. If you want to tech up to Mechanized Kompanie, it now costs 20 manpower less. Maybe they did this to partially offset all the nerfs they made to the 8 round this patch, and certainly have been seeing a lot less of this compared to just light support company with 5 support elements and a Flakvierling as of late, so maybe they're trying to make this a bit more enticing. In the armory, the rapid advance upgrade on vehicles that already have the ability to capture, such as the Recon Tractor and the Funkpanzerwagen. This used to kind of be added on top of their capture, so they'd almost get like twice the capture rate when this was upgraded, and that has been removed now. While I think that's probably fine because they were capping extremely fast before this, it would also be nice if it wasn't completely removed. Maybe they got like a 25% buff to the capture rate instead of like 100%. That would be kind of nice, so it's not a completely worthless upgrade for them. The 250 got a similar change to the Dingo, where its moving accuracy was improved, but its moving cooldown was nerfed, so it's going to be similar against infantry while firing on the move, but worse against vehicles. Alright, that's what they're doing. Related to this, combat half-tracks now takes 15 seconds longer to complete, and then if you want to upgrade to the 250/9, that also takes 15 seconds longer to complete, because there's no fuel cost associated with these upgrades, so they want to delay them by a similar amount to the other light vehicles that were getting maybe like a 10 fuel cost increase. So yeah, alright, that seems fair enough. I will say that, I played with the 250/9 a lot in the previous patch. A lot of different builds. Generally, I thought like it was okay, not that good with most, unless you went for armed support and got the machine gun upgrade on it as well. And with superior fire drills, this thing was actually a bit of a white machine, quite good at chasing down squads on retreat and getting squad wipes. That's like the secret sauce you need if you want to use 250/9. And maybe, with all the other light vehicles getting quite nerfed this patch, comparatively, the 250/9 might be on the agenda, so watch out for that with armored support. The Kradschutzen has been buffed. It's come down in cost by 20 manpower. Also, they've improved its moving performance. The cooldown has been reduced when it's firing on the move, so there'll be less of a gap between bursts when it's firing on the move. So it'll be better at like chasing down retreating infantry squads, or if you're going head to head against something like a 4x4, Kradschutzen will be better now. So that's a couple big changes, but the biggest change of all is that it now provides the combined arms buff to Afrika Korps infantry. So yeah, that's a pretty big deal, because before this, if you wanted combined arms before the 6-minute mark when your cooldowns for your call-ins came on, you had to go for a 250. So that kind of hurt your build diversity if you wanted that combined arms buff. The combined arms buff isn't as strong as it used to be when the game launched, but it's still pretty noticeable. Kind of gives you the edge where without it, previous to this patch, you'd lose to like sections and rifles, but with it, you beat them, right? So it definitely makes a pretty noticeable gap in these early game engagements, and now the Kradschutzen can provide it. So also on top of this, it means the Kradschutzen no longer has to stand on its own with its utility on capping and fighting. With the extra utility from this, it makes it quite a lot better. And because it's so fast, it can probably like zip around the map, providing combined arms in different spots pretty easily as the engagements start to arise. You don't have to just like blob around the Kradschutzen because it's so fast. So yeah, this is a really big deal. It cannot be understated how big it is, giving the Kradschutzen the combined arms buff now. Related to that, Afrika Korps Panzergrenadiers have also been buffed this patch. Got the new value in blue, old value in red, mainly in the mid to long range kind of zone. I do think Afrika Korps P-Greens were struggling in the previous patch, especially in the early game. They were kind of getting lumped up by sections and rifles. But they felt like pretty fine in the late game in terms of straight up firepower. Maybe they're a little bit hard to upkeep in terms of manpower in the late game, but in terms of firepower, they felt pretty good. Mainly the early game, they felt they were struggling a bit. And this kind of gives them like an all game long buff, right? So it's not really addressing the early game, but what did address potentially the early game deficit was the combined arms buff being added to the Kradschutzen, which, helps them in the early game where maybe previous to this, you weren't able to get combined arms buff on them because you weren't able to get a 250 out early enough. So I don't know if this buff is actually going to be necessary in conjunction with the combined arms buff on the Kradschutzen. It might have been too much for them. And as I said, it gives them a buff all game long rather than just in the early game where I felt that they were specifically struggling. Assault Grenadiers have received quite a few buffs this patch. First off, their Assault Disembark ability, this is what they got in the previous patch, has been buffed in terms of duration, goes for another 5 seconds now. I do think this ability is, like a kind of a cool idea, but often can be hard to execute, especially, outside of like 7 minutes onwards in the match. So they're trying to make it more worthwhile to use it. Sure. They've also massively buffed up the grenade assault. Most important thing, damage per grenade has gone from 40 to 70. So not far off double the damage. They've also made it so I think they've got better far AoE, so on the edge of the grenades AoE, we're doing more damage. And I think the grenade's going to have less scatter, and they should throw them out a little bit faster. So we'll see how that goes here. It's a spread out rifleman squad. So killed everything that was in the zone, but yeah, quite tight scatter. It's a spread out unit, not that good. Try it over here. It's a clumped up unit. I think these grenades still do have a damage cap of 3. Yeah, I mean, they're better, for sure. I think this is probably due a change. I don't know. Maybe they could still have a bit more scatter. Like, I think maybe that's part of the appeal of the grenade assaults. Maybe you can catch like a slightly wider zone on them. But I do think they were due a buff because at the time where all the other grenades got buffed, maybe like 9 months to a year ago, these did not, and they kind of got left in the dust. So I do think they were due a buff. Also, the STG that Assault Grenadiers can get if you plunder an Axis wreck has been buffed this patch. Got the new one with blue or one in red. And you can see in the mid-range we were getting a little bit of extra DPS, which I do think was necessary because this was kind of like the ugly duckling of all the plunder options. Didn't give you that much of a boost over the MP40s. It was comparatively quite a lot worse compared to like plundering a Thompson from an allied wreck. And obviously like plundering Braiders or bars is so good on your Panzergrenadiers too. So now it's just making plundering with Assault Grenadiers a more attractive option. On the 2.5 ton medical truck, its Vet 1 bonus, field supplies has been nerfed this patch. It has halved the bonuses it provides to infantry, both in terms of rate of fire and accuracy. Speed is unchanged and so is duration though. So it's still pretty good just for the duration and the speed buff alone, getting around like this quite a bit faster, and you combine this up with combined arms too. Squads will zip around pretty good. But yeah, I still think it's pretty good after this. And if you're a fan of like trying to reduce the strength of blobbing around forward retreats and med trucks and stuff like that, then getting a nerf like this is a good thing overall. The LEIG got nerfed in terms of its rate of fire, both for its barrage and auto fire. So we're going to compare it here to the Pack Howie and the Mortar. First, the attack ground auto fire. Mortar's slowest to start firing. Still the slowest in terms of auto fire, it seems. Alright, try the barrage now. Seem to be basically the same. Alright, I already covered 8 rad nerfs in the Wehrmacht video, so let's talk about the Marder. It's come down in manpower cost by 40, but increased in fuel cost by 10. It's still actually a lot cheaper than the Wehrmacht version for some reason, so that's interesting. Also, they increased the rotation rate of the Africa Corps Marder, not the Wehrmacht one. Notice if I start these guys pivoting at the same time. Africa Corps one will finish first. So yeah, they didn't apply the rotation rate buff to both of these, so these Marders are getting more and more different. It's not just their like veterancy bonuses and sight main gun and stuff. Yeah, they're becoming further and further apart in terms of other stats as well. The 254 Recon Tractor has gone through some changes. It's had a cost increase by 20 fuel, which often doesn't matter that much as Africa Corps, unless you're just like throwing away vehicles or you're planning to build it as your first unit after building Mechanized Kompanie. Usually you got a bit of fuel floating, spare for this. They've also buffed up its recon now, such that it goes out, I think, 35 range longer, up to 125 range on its detection. And they say that their like detecting mode will hold here for 2 seconds longer after they get revealed by a sweep. I will say that at the moment they don't seem to be synced up, like the expanding detecting kind of animation and when these units actually get revealed by it don't seem to be synced up. Maybe like the animation was timed for different, like maybe it worked when it was at 90 range and now that it has to go out another 30 range, it's kind of out of sync or something. So yeah, there's some work needs to be done there. The Flakvierling has had its fuel cost increased by 10, similar to most other light vehicles this patch. But the more important thing, apparently it can no longer suppress infantry while it's firing on the move. So let's see how it goes here. Got a squad over here, we're going to do a bit of a drive-by. Yeah, that's a really big deal. I know a lot of people have been asking for that change for a very long time now, and it has finally happened. Because the Flakvierling with that on-the-move suppression was a real handful to deal with. Still doesn't have to like set up before it can fire and suppress, like the Flak half-track from the old COH3. But yeah, this makes it quite a lot harder for the Flakvierling to kite, especially like handheld anti-tank. Bazookas and stuff are going to have a much easier time, I think, against the Flakvierling after this change. And even like snaring squads, you know, if you're coming in here charging in with a squad with a sprint or something, and the Flakvierling wants to drive away so it can't get hit by like an anti-tank grenade, it won't be able to also suppress the squad as it's closing the distance. So yeah, it does make the Flakvierling significantly weaker, and maybe especially like the bazooka team when it's stationary got that extra range bonus now. It's going to have a much easier time against the Flakvierling. So yeah, pretty big nerf not being able to suppress while on the move. The Africa Corps variant of the Stug got the same changes: extra armor, faster rotation rate, 10 fuel cost increase over here. Guastatori! Buy a mug, will ya? Ever see some changes this patch? They were supposed to trade out the armor, they had 1.5 armor, to damage reduction, to 25% damage reduction, as you can see here in the description. New, more enhanced description with more features listed in there, which is kind of nice as well. Unfortunately, they forgot to remove the armor from Guastatori, so they are Terminators at the moment. Going to address that in the hotfix. Should be early next week, I think, at this stage. So, all right, we'll move past that pretty big mistake. Unfortunate that it happened. But yeah, in effect, you know, they added this, or they made this change because rifles are getting penetration. That will make Guastatori with the armor much worse against rifles, and especially at the range where Guastatori want to be. They want to be up close and personal with their SMGs, and that's where they're getting shredded by the 1.5 penetration of rifles. The other change they made this patch. So yeah, they switched it out to damage reduction. I think previous to this, you know, like small arms will be reduced by a third because of the 1.5 armor. Now it's been changed to 25% less. So it's kind of made them maybe a bit worse against most forms of small arms, except for maybe like LMGs, which tend to have extra penetration. So it kind of makes them better against LMGs. And overall, I don't think it's like a very good change. Like, I can see why they kind of had to do it. But yeah, it used to be the case, you know, Guastatori had some counters. You could, you know, upgrade LMGs as your weapon option, prioritize that to try and counter them that way. You could throw grenades, you could use light vehicles. But now all those counters don't really work when it's just a flat damage reduction like that. So switching from armor to damage reductions kind of removes some of like the fun and the nuance to using and countering Guastatori. Oh, also on top of that, because flamethrowers got way better this patch, and Guastatori have 2 of them, they obviously benefit from that change a huge amount, so they are way better. Maybe I'll look at the performance after the hotfix. In the Italian Combined Arms battle group, the Carro Armato has had a fuel cost increase by 10, similar to most other light vehicles in this patch, but no change to the Semavente, still at 45 fuel, making it a relative bargain. We didn't see too much of the Semavente in previous patches. I think part of the reason why it used to unlock like relatively late, often you'd have trouble getting it on the field in time to counter your opponent's light vehicle, and that would leave you exposed. But with its competitor light vehicles now arriving, you know, like 5 or 10 fuel later, it does improve the timing of the Semavente, so maybe it's a more appealing option both in terms of timing and relative fuel cost, a bit of a bargain. The double L6/40 Corlin has had its fuel cost increased by 10, essentially 5 per tank. Now, based on the vehicle's old performance, that probably would have been fine, but new performance with the buffed up flamethrowers, obviously from what we've seen, that is no longer fine. Yeah, these are really good at base destroying, and I think especially in team games where you can kind of afford to like amass a bunch of them in hiding, let your teammates hold the line and then swoop in from an unexpected angle, knock out somebody's base. Yeah, something needs to be done to address these, and I imagine this will be changed in the hotfix, and this is probably a large part of the reason why the Axis win rate is so high at the moment. L6 is combined up with Guastatori, just both happen to be in the same battle group, kind of boosting up Africa Corps win rates, and you know, probably bringing up Wehrmacht along with them because they're combined up in the arranged teams together, right? So yeah, something needs to be done about this. This is maybe a situation where like an extra half a command point delay would make a difference, but you know, obviously with a command point system we can't do that because maybe the L6 is more gated by command point timing rather than fuel costs, so this is extra 10 fuel isn't really slowing them down compared to the other light vehicles stacking on top of the issues, and I imagine they're probably going to have some of their damage buff against buildings reverted. I suppose now is a good time for me to weigh in with my opinion on the Annihilation win condition and how easy it is to destroy bases in COH3. Generally, I do like it as an option. Like, I do like how much easier it is to kill base structures compared to COH2, where it was like really, really hard, especially if you destroyed your opponent's headquarters. I think they could repair it up for free. So it's just the risk versus reward wasn't there in COH2 at all. It was too hard, I think. In COH3, though, you know, not being able to rebuild your headquarters at all after it gets destroyed, maybe that's a bit too punishing. Maybe there could be like a middle ground where they could rebuild it, but takes a minute and costs like 300 manpower, something like that. So, you know, the person who's doing the base dive or base killing can still get rewarded for that. But, you know, if you lose your headquarters, you don't lose the game for the rest of the game and can't do anything. Maybe some middle grounds there. Because, yeah, I do like having a base dive as an option. Because, you know, if your opponent's got a lot of units out on the field, it's an option to try and draw them out of position. It's another tactical option. Yeah, I think it's good. The Funkpanzerwagen, which is available in the Battlefield Espionage battle group. Now you can put squads inside of it. They won't be able to shoot out of it, but gives you another option to carry them around, or maybe get value out of the assault disembark of assault grenadiers, so that's kind of cool for them. On top of that, you can now tow heavy weapons like the 88 Flak with it. So you can do this with the vanilla 250 as well, so just extending this to the Funkwagen. Because, you know, quite often if you're using the 88, maybe a whole bunch of RD lands, you end up losing your truck, and then you're in trouble trying to rebuild a truck, trying to get something up there to tow it again. Now you have another option, the Funkwagen as well. In the Armoured Support battle group, vehicle awareness has been buffed. It no longer costs munitions to use, and it will work while the vehicle is moving around as well. But it has a 3-minute cooldown instead of a 1-minute cooldown. So let's see how it goes. Activate it now. And yep, see those over there. Moving around, moving around. There's no like scanning out radar mode to know when it's going to proc and when things are going to get detected though, so that's interesting. It is up against some very stiff competition. Salvage kits cost 1 less command point to unlock, and they got buffed this patch as well, so might still not see it used too often, but certainly a much more appealing option now that it doesn't cost any munitions to use. The Flame Panzer III has had a change in cost. It's come down on manpower by 100, but increased in fuel by 15. Kind of brings its overall cost a bit more in line with if you wanted to construct a Panzer III from your tech structure, maybe a bit closer to what you would expect. And on top of the changes that we saw to flamethrowers in my previous video, I would expect to see quite a lot more of the flame tank after this change. Maybe some kind of strategies where you go with the Mechanized Kompanie into a flame tank could be a pretty strong option. Also, the Panzer Storm battlegroup ability has been nerfed in terms of the max speed bonus it provides, coming down from 35% to 20%, similar to the other global speed boosters in this patch. So yeah, it makes this quite a lot less appealing. I think one of the main selling points of this ability now, rather than the speed bonuses, is the immunity to engine crits. I don't really like that functionality. I think that's kind of silly. It's one of the main like counterpoints to vehicles, being able to snare them. I could maybe imagine it being changed to immunity to anti-tank grenades or to mines, but to both at the same time. I never really liked that functionality. But yeah, now that Panzer Storm, all the speed bonuses have been reduced so much, I think it used to provide plus 50% like way back in the early days, right? Immunity to engine crits is like the main feature of this now. So now let's have a chat about some balance related things. Starting out with the previous patch, I think generally they did a pretty good job considering how many things they changed in that patch, but not such a good job that they could go completely hands off the steering wheel for a full 2 months with no adjustments to balance whatsoever. I think maybe some of the overcompensating kind of swings that we see in these patches are because there's such a long gap between them. And I think most of like the frequent player base would like to see smaller balance patches more frequently. And maybe, you know, now that most players have hopefully played through the campaign, I think that was an issue, like patches were knocking out campaign saves or something. Now that most of the player base has probably finished the campaign and stuff, maybe that could be a reality. One thing that did not get touched in this patch was AT guns. I feel like in the previous patch there was a huge increase in AT gun spam. It was very common in my 1v1 matches to see each players with like 3 AT guns each, which is a lot, combined up with like mainline spam as well. It's kind of hurting the diversity of build orders in the game. I'm thinking maybe like the Vet 2 bonus to snares, the damage bonus, might have been a mistake. As for AT guns, I think it's maybe like a little bit too hard to counter them with mortars. I don't know what it is. Like mortars generally do pretty well against machine guns. Like oftentimes players try to put them in cover because they're trying to defend against a squad like incoming. So they want to be more resilient against that. But AT guns you usually have out in the open a bit more, right? So they're more spread out. So yeah, I feel like the really tight scatter and relatively low AoE of the mortar works pretty well at countering machine guns, but doesn't seem to be very good at countering AT guns, which can make it hard to counter them until you get to some of those like really ultra late, like rocket artillery, heavy artillery options. So let's see how we go here. I'm going to fire 2 shells with each of these. See how they go against each. As I said, usually you know, the MG would be even more clumped up than this. But you can see the MG is now under half health after that. The AT gun is still at over 3/4 health. So I think that kind of illustrates my point. Speaking of machine guns, they didn't get any DPS buffs from the TTK changes in the previous patch. And in my opinion, they felt a little bit weak. I think the problem is now, say a squad comes in and starts to flank the machine gun, because that squad's doing more damage, and this is we're talking about in the early game, we'll be able to force away the machine gun more easily. So the machine gun's not able to maintain its position as easily as it could pre the TTK changes, but whatever it's shooting at still takes, you know, the same long as time to die. So the equation of how the machine gun's able to force away a squad versus how easily it's able to be forced away by enemy squads has kind of been thrown off, and in my opinion has led machine guns to feel a bit weak since then. Fallschirmjäger didn't receive any buffs in the TTK changes, and I feel like this has caused them to fall behind. They are relatively early game, you know, arriving after 2 command points, which is still somewhat early, and they're kind of like a mid-range squad as well, so they do need to get stuck in, get a little bit closer to the action, causes them to take more damage. And at this stage, I think you're generally better off just building a Panzergrenadier if you've got Panzergrenadier Company down. I think they're just a much stronger squad overall, better at like fighting against barred up riflemen. So maybe you'll still see them a bit in team games just because you can reinforce off the Luftwaffe relay point, but in ones they're pretty much a dead unit. In general, loiters still just feel too good. As we saw with my test of the Bofors AA earlier in the video, it took essentially 3 passes before all the planes were shot down. And by then the damage is done, you know, you've probably lost your tank. So my idea for this was maybe to change AA, make it more potent at shooting down planes, but reduce its range, right? So that the positioning of your AA matters more. And that way it would kind of like change the scaling, make it more even between ones and team game modes, where in team game modes, maybe at the moment, you can kind of just plop 2 pieces of AA close to the middle of the map and everything's covered. And then the positioning will be more important. Also when it comes to countering strafes, like single pass strafes, that way if your AA was in the right spot, you'll be able to shoot them down because it's more potent in time before they got their payload off. But then, yeah, it will come down to positioning again. So that's my idea for helping to counter loiters. That's it. Let me know what you think about this balance patch in the comments below. And if you enjoy these videos, consider buying some merch or signing up to the Patreon because they take quite a long time to produce.